ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः नमस्कार दोस्तों. I am going to give you third video on eradication of Vasanas. Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi used to emphasize on the eradication of Vasanas because they are the biggest hurdles in the sadhanas for self-inquiry, self-realization and liberation. Now I start the third with the video with talk number 623. Sri Bhagavan said to another devotee that there are five states. Number one, sleep. Number two, before waking, a state free from thoughts. Number three, sense of happiness of that freedom from thoughts. Rasavada. Number three, sense of happiness of that freedom from thoughts. Rasavada. Number four, the internal moment of the vasanas. Akshaya. And fifth is complete waking with distraction. Vikshepa. The second of those should be made permanent. Talk number 625. Miss Marston, an English lady visitor. I have read Who Am I? While inquiring who the I is, I cannot hold it for any length of time. Secondly, I have no interest in the environment, but yet I have hopes that I shall find some interest in life. Mercy, if there are no interest, it is good. The interpreter points out that the questioner hopes to find some interest in life. Mercy, that means there are those vasanas. A dreamer dreams a dream. He sees the dream world with pleasures, pains, etc. But he wakes up and then loses all interest in the dream world. So it is with the waking world also. Just as the dream world being only a part of yourself and not different from you ceases to interest you, so also the present world would cease to interest you. If you awake from this waking dream, samsara, and realize that it is a part of yourself and not an objective reality, because you think that you are apart from the objects around you, you desire a thing. But if you understand that the thing was only a thought form, you would no longer desire it. All things are like bubbles on water. You are the water and the objects are the bubbles. They cannot exist apart from the water, but they are not quite the same as the water. Guru Ramana Memories and Notes. July 2, 1936. Cohen, should all Vasanas mental habits be completely overcome before self-realization takes place, or may some remain for self-realization to destroy? Bhagavan replies, Vasanas which do not obstruct self-realization remain. In Yoga Vasishtha, two classes of Vasanas are distinguished, those of enjoyment and those of bondage. The former the former remain even after mukti is attained, but the latter are destroyed by it. Attachment is the cause of binding vasanas, but enjoyment without attachment does not bind and continues even in sahaja. Maharishi's Gospel. Devotee, since realization is not possible without vasana akshaya, how am I to realize that state in which the vasanas are effectively destroyed? Mercy, you are in that state now. Devotee, does it mean that by holding on to the self, the vasanas should be destroyed as and when they emerge? Mercy, they will themselves be destroyed if you remain as you are. Devotee, What prevents the infinite, undifferentiated light of consciousness arising from the heart from revealing itself to the Ajnani? Mercy. Just as water in the pot reflects the enormous sun within the narrow limits of the pot, even so the vasanas or latent tendencies of the mind of the individual acting as the reflecting medium catch the all-pervading infinite light of consciousness arising from the heart and present in the form of a aham and ahamvriti reflection. The phenomenon called the mind seeing only this reflection, the Ajnani is deluded into the belief that he is a finite being, the jiva. If the mind becomes introverted through inquiry into the source of ahamvriti, the vasanas become extinct, and in the absence of the reflecting medium, the phenomenon of reflection, namely the mind, also disappears, being absorbed into the light of the one reality, the heart. This is the sum and substance of all that an aspirant needs to know. What is imperatively required to him is an earnest and one-pointed inquiry into the source of Ahamvirti. Face to face with Sri Ramana Maharshi. 187. Padma and her husband Venkataraman, trustee of TMP Mahadevan, number 25 Trust, Chennai, are devotees of Sri Ramana. With my husband, went to see Ramana in 1947. After prostrating, we stood near him. I said, Bhagwan, I want Atam Saksatkaram, self-realization. Bhagwan looked at me and smilingly asked, Apadhya, is it so? The way Bhagwan asked me took my breath away. It was so charming. Then my husband said she wants to stay here permanently. Bhagwan did not say anything but looked at me steadily, pouring forth his grace. I used to sit in the hall spellbound for many hours, such was his power. While engaged in meditation, old memories would well up in my mind and disturb the flow of meditation. I wanted to find a way out to quench all the vasanas. One day I got an opportunity to put my problem before Bhagwan. His reply was, you be the subject instead of the object, then the vasanas would not trouble you anymore. This suggestion and his grace worked for me. Day by day with Bhagwan. 2nd January 1946 afternoon. Mr. Joshi has submitted what Bhagwan calls a question paper and Bhagwan answers the same. First, about the Gyanis doing work without the mind. You imagine one cannot do work if the mind is killed. Why do you suppose that it is the mind alone that can make one to do work? There may be other causes which can also produce activity. Look at this clock, for instance, it is working without a mind. Again, suppose we say the Jnani has a mind. His mind is very different from the ordinary man's mind. He is like the man who is hearing a story told with his mind all on the same distant object. The mind rid of vasanas, though doing work, is not doing work. On the other hand, if the mind is full of vasanas, it is doing work even if the body is not active or moving. 11th January 1946 afternoon, a young man from Colombo asked Bhagwan Ji Krishna Murthy teaches the method of effortless and choiceless awareness as distinct from that of deliberate concentration. Would Sri Bhagwan be pleased to explain how best to practice meditation and what form the object of meditation should take place? Bhagwan, effortless and choiceless awareness is our real nature. If we can attain it or be in that state, it is all right. But one cannot reach it without effort. The effort of deliberate meditation, all the age-long vasanas carry the mind outward and turn it to external objects. All such thoughts have to be given up and the mind turned inward. For that effort is necessary for most people. Of course, every book says, be quiet or still, but it is not easy. That's why all this effort is necessary. Even if we find one who has at once achieved the mana or supreme state indicated by be quiet or still, you may take it that the effort necessary has already been finished in a previous life, so that effortless and choiceless awareness is reached only after deliberate meditation. That meditation can take any form which appeals to you best. See what helps you to keep away all other thoughts and adopt that method for your meditation. In this connection, Bhagwan quoted verse 5 and 52 from Udal Poyu Vayu and 36 from Payapuli of Saint Thayumanwar. Their gist is as follows: bliss will follow if you are still. But however much you may tell your mind about this truth, the mind will not keep quiet. It is the mind that won't keep quiet. It is the mind which tells the mind, be quiet and you will attain bliss. Though all the scriptures have said it, though we hear about it every day from the great ones, and though even our Guru says it, we, ne- we never are quiet, but stray into the world of Maya and sense objects. That's why conscious, deliberate effort or meditation is required to attain that Mona state or the state of being quiet. 29th January 1946 afternoon, the visitor said, I am Grihastha, still I want to practice brahmacharya even with my wife, but I am not able to succeed. What should I do? Bhagwan replied, that is because of age-long vasana. The sankalpas are so powerful because they have existed so long, but they will go. 12 April 1946 afternoon. Question 4. What is the best way of dealing with desires with a view to getting rid of them, satisfying them or suppressing them? Bhagwan. If a desire can be got rid of by satisfying it, there will be no harm in satisfying such a desire, but desires generally are not eradicated by satisfaction. Trying to root them out that way is like pouring spirits to quench fire. At the same time, the proper remedy is not forcible suppression, since such suppression is bound to reach sooner or later into the forceful surging up with undesirable consequences. The proper way to get rid of a desire is to find out who gets the desire, what is the source, what is its source. When this is found, the desire is rooted out and it will never again emerge or grow. Small desires, such as the desire to eat, drink, and sleep, and attend to calls of nature, though these may also be classed among desires you can safely satisfy, they will not implant vasanas in your mind, necessitating further birth. Those activities are just necessary to carry on life and are not likely to develop or leave behind vasanas or tendencies. As a general rule, therefore, there is no harm in satisfying a desire where the satisfaction will not lead to further desire by creating vasanas in the mind. 1st June 1946 afternoon. In the afternoon, Bhagwan explained in answer to Mr. H. C. Khanna of Kanpur, why should your occupation or duties in life interfere with your spiritual effort? For instance, there is a difference between your activities at home and in the office. In your office activities, you are detached, and so long as you do your duty, you do not care what happens or whether it results in gain or loss to the employer. But your duties at home are performed with attachment, and you are all the time anxious as to whether they will bring advantage or disadvantage to you and your family. But it is possible to perform all the activities of life with detachment and regard only the self as real. It is it is wrong to suppose that if one is fixed in the self, one's duties in life will not be properly performed. It is like an actor. He dresses and acts and even feels the part he is playing. But he knows really that he is not that character but someone else in real life. In the same way, why should the body consciousness or the feeling I am the body disturb you? Once you know for certain that you are not the body but the self, nothing that the body does should seek you from abidance in the self. Such abidance will never interfere with the proper and effective discharge of whatever duties the body has, any more than the actor's being aware of his real stature in life interferes with his acting a part on the stage. You ask whether you can tell yourself I am not the body but the self. Of course, whenever you feel tempted to identify yourself with the body, as you may often have to owing to old vasanas, it may be help to remind yourself that you are not the body but the self. But you should not make such a repetition a mantram constantly saying I am not the body but the self. By proper inquiry into the self, the notion I am this body will gradually vanish, and in time the faith that you are the self will become unshakable. 26th June 1946. A little later, he Khanna handed Bhagwan a piece of paper on which he had written something. After reading it, Bhagwan said, it is a complaint. He says, I have been coming to you, and this time I have remained nearly a month at your feet, and I find no improvement at all in my condition. My vasanas are as strong as ever. When I go back, my friends will laugh at me and ask what good my stay here has done me. Then turning to Khanna, Bhagwan said, why distress your mind by thinking that jnana has not come or that the vasanas have not disappeared? Don't give room for thoughts. In the last stanza of Sukavari by Thayun Mar, the saint says, much the same as is written on the paper, and Bhagwan made me, a Devraja Mudaliar, read the stanza and translate into English for the benefit of those who do not know Tamil. It goes, the mind mocks me, and though I tell you 10,000 times you are indifferent, so how am I to attain peace and bliss? Then I said to Khanna, you are not the only one who complains to Bhagwan like this. I have more than once complained in the same way, and I still do, for I find no improvement in myself. Khanna replied, it is not only that I find no improvement, but I think I have grown worse. The vasanas are stronger now. I can't understand it. Bhagwan again quoted the last three stanzas of Mandala thin of Thayunmar, where the mind is coached as the most generous and disinterested of givers to go back to its birthplace or source and thus give the devotee peace and bliss. And he asked me to read out a translation of it that I once made. The collected works of Sri Ramana Maharshi, Self-Inquiry 12. Devotee, is self-experience possible for the mind whose nature is constant change? Maharshi, since Sattva Guna, the constituent of Prakriti which makes for purity, intelligence, etc., is the nature of mind, and since the mind is pure and undefiled like ether, what is called mind in truth of the nature of knowledge, when it stays in that natural, that is pure state, it has not even the name mind. It is only the erroneous knowledge which mistakes one for another, that is called mind. What was originally the pure sattva mind of the nature of pure knowledge forgets its knowledge nature on account of nescience, gets transformed into the world under the influence of tamoguna, that is the constituent of prakriti, which makes for dullness, inertness, etc. Being under the influence of rajoguna, that is the constituent of prakriti, which makes for activity, passions, etc. imagines I am the body, etc. The world is real. It requires the consequent merit and demerit through attachment, aversion, etc., and through the residual impressions, vasanas thereof attains birth and death. But the mind which has got rid of its defilement, sin, through action without attachment performed in many past lives, listens to the teaching of scripture from a true guru, reflects on its meaning and meditates in order to gain the natural state of the mental mode of the form of the self, that is, of the form I am Brahma, which is the result of the continued contemplation of Brahma. Thus will be removed the mind's transformation into the world in the aspect of tamoguna and its roving wherein the aspect of rajoguna. When this removal takes place, the mind becomes subtle and unmoving. It is only by the mind that is impure and is under the influence of rajas and tamas that reality, that is the self which is very subtle and unchanging, cannot be experienced, just as a piece of fine silk cloth cannot be stitched with a heavy crowbar, or as the details of subtle objects cannot be distinguished by the light of a lamp flame that flickers in the wind. But in the pure mind that has been rendered subtle and unmoving by the meditation described above, the self-bliss, the Brahma, will become manifest. As without mind there cannot be experience, it is possible for the purified mind endowed with the extremely subtle mode virtue to experience the self-bliss by remaining in that form, that is the form of Brahma. Then that one's self is of nature of Brahma will be clearly experienced. Self-inquiry 13. Devotee. When there is activity in regard to works, we are neither the agents of those works nor their enjoyers. The activities of three instruments, that is the mind, speech, and body, could we remain unattached, thinking thus. Mercy, after the mind has been made to stay in the self, which is its deity, and has been rendered indifferent to empirical matters because it does not stray away from the self, how can the mind think as mentioned above? Do not such thoughts constitute bondage? When such thoughts are arise due to residual impressions, vasanas, one should restrain the mind from flowing that way, endeavor to retain it in the self state and make it turn indifferent to empirical matter. One should not give room in the mind for such thoughts as is this good or is that good? Can this be done or can that be done? One should be vigilant even before such thoughts arise and make the mind stay in its native state. If any little room is given, such a disturbed mind will do harm to us while posing as our friend, like the foe appearing to be a friend, it will topple us down. Is it not because one forgets one's self that such thoughts arise and cause more and more evil? While it is true that to think through discrimination, I do not do anything, all actions are performed by the instruments, is a means to prevent the mind from flowing along thought vasanas, does it not follow that only if the mind flows along thought vasanas, that it must be restrained through discrimination as stated before? Can the mind that remains in the self state think as I and as I behave empirically thus and thus? In all manner of ways possible, one should endeavor gradually not to forget one's true self, that is good. If that is accomplished, all will be accomplished. The mind should not be directed to any other matter. Even though one may perform like a mad person the actions that are the result of prarabdha karma, one should retain the mind in the self state without letting the thought I do arise. Have not countless bhaktas, devotees, performed their numerous empirical functions with an attitude of indifference? Spiritual instruction 26. Devotee, just as the sage's past karma is the cause of his present activities, will not the impressions vasanas caused by his present activities adhere to him in future? Maharshi, only one who is free from all the latent tendencies vasanas is a sage. That being so, how can the tendencies of karma affect him who is entirely unattached to activity? Devika Lotra Devika Lotara 68. One must engage unfailingly in yoga, the practice of self-abidance in all conditions without allowing any special event to affect one adversely. If due to doubts, delusion arises in the form of attraction to worship in holy places and temples on account of past practices and vasanas rejected immediately. Atambodha 37. Long constant practice of I am Brahma only destroys all vasanas, latent tendencies born of ignorance as an efficacious remedy. Rasayana eradicates a disease. Viveka Chudamani. Although a man knows this to be true, the feeling of I am the doer, I am the enjoyer arises strongly in him owing to the bondage, samsara, caused by the mighty, beginningless vasanas, innate tendencies which often obstruct him. Curb these tendencies the moment they arise by your own effort, by abiding firmly in the self, by a vision of the self. Sages such as Vasistha have declared that the withering of the vasanas is indeed liberation, realization of the self as it is does not come through tendencies to worldly or sense activities or through prolonged study of the scriptures. To those who seek deliverance from the prison or ocean of samsara, the above threefold tendencies are iron fetters, say those who are realized. Therefore, attachment to the world, the scriptures, and the body must be given up, and it must be fully realized that the body is sustained by the force of prarabdha, past karma. You should therefore courageously renounce these attachments and strive energetically to overcome tamas by power of sattva and rajas, then rajas through mixed sattva, then mixed sattva through pure sattva. You should do this with a firm and calm mind, helped by the great texts such as that thou art, which proclaim the identity between the individual self and Brahma. Seek by reasoning and experience to get rid of the vasana so that you may have a faith in Brahma and completely root out from the body and senses the feeling of I and mine, which constantly appears as a result of the superimposition. This is to be done by firm abidance in the one individual self in the heart and by meditating on the unceasing experience of knowledge of the unity of Brahma and self. Thus, I am not the ego. I am the unceasing perfection of Brahma experienced as I, the witness of thought forms. This meditation must be persisted in until the ego sense is completely rooted out from the body without a vestige and the world of individuals appear like a dream. He who meditates has no work to do except beg and perform his natural functions. He must never forget the self by giving room for worldly speech and sense objects. Sandalwood is fragrant by nature, but its fragrance is masked by a bad smell when it comes into contact with water and is revealed when it is rubbed. Constant practice of meditation is the rubbing. The latent tendencies, vasanas of the mind are removed only to the extent to which it abides in the self. It is by such constant abidance in the self that the mind of the yogi is destroyed, and by the destruction of the mind, the outer non-self tendencies of the heart are utterly eradicated. Then the experience of the Supreme Self, which was formerly veiled by the magic of the Vasanas, shines forth of its own accord like the fragrance of a uncontaminated sandal paste. All forms of creation and imagination appearing as you, I, this, etc., are a result of the impurity of the intellect. They seem to exist in the absolute, attributeless Supreme Self, but in the state of absorption, samadhi, and experience of Brahma, they cease to exist. Also, the self seems to be divisible owing to differences in the vehicles. But if these are removed, it shines single and complete. Perpetual concentration is necessary in order to dissolve these differentiations in the absolute. The wasp's grub that renounces all activity and meditates constantly upon the wasp becomes a wasp, and in the same way, the soul that longs for Brahma with one pointed meditation becomes the Supreme Self through the power of its meditation and perpetual abidance in Brahma in the absolute stillness. So, persevere constantly in meditation on Brahma, and as a result, the mind will be cleansed of the stain of the three gunas until it becomes perfectly pure and resumes its state when it is ripe for dissolution in Brahma, like salt in water. It is like gold being cleansed of its alloy and returning to the purity of its true state through being put but in a furnace. Only in such purity of mind can nirvikalpa samadhi be obtained, and there with the essential bliss of identity. Through this samadhi, all the knots of the vasanas are loosened and all past karmas destroyed, so that the light of the self is experienced without effort, inwardly and outwardly, and at all places and times. Thus, the subtle Dharma is experienced in the single and subtle mental mode of samadhi by those of subtle intellect, and in no other way, by no gross outlook, can it be experienced. Similarly, the sage who has inner and outer senses controlled in solitude and equanimity obtains experience of the all-pervading self through perpetual concentration, and thus getting rid of all mental creations caused by the darkness of ignorance, becomes actionless and without attributes, and remains eternally in the bliss of Brahma himself. Only he is liberated from the bondage of samsara, who, having obtained nirvikalpa samadhi, perceives the mind, senses, and objects, the ears and sounds, etc., to inhere in the self, and not he who speaks only from theoretical wisdom. Brahma can be clearly experienced without any barrier only through nirvikalpa samadhi, for apart from that, mental mode always fluctuates, leading from one thought to another. Therefore, control the senses and mind and abide firmly in the self. Utterly destroy the darkness of ignorance and its causes through experience of the one self, and abide ever as the self. Reflection: the truth heard is 100 times more potent than hearing it, and abiding in it 100,000 times more potent than reflection on it. What limit then can there be to potency obtained through nirvikalpa samadhi? Drigdrishya viveka. Buddhi, as the sum total of the inner organs in contact with the reflected consciousness, has two aspects. One is called egoity and the other mind. This contact of the buddhi with the reflected consciousness is like the identity of a red hot iron ball with fire. Hence, the gross body passes for a conscious entity. The contact establishing identity between the ego and the reflected consciousness is of three kinds. Number one, the identification of the ego with the reflected consciousness is natural or innate. Second, the identification of the ego with the body is due to past karma. Third, the identification of the ego with the witness is due to ignorance. The natural or innate contact continues as long as the buddhi, but on realization of the self, it proves to be false. The third mentioned contact is broken when it is discovered by experience that there is no sort of contact of anything at all with the self which is being. The second mentioned contact that born of past karma ceases to exist on the destruction of the innate tendencies vasana. In the deep sleep state, when the body is inert, the ego is fully merged in the causal ignorance. The ego is half manifest in the dream state, and its being fully manifest is the waking state. It is the mode or modification of thought with its latent tendencies that creates the inner world of dreams in the dream state and the outer world in the waking state. The subtle body, which is the material cause of mind and ego, experiences the three states and also birth and death, the heart and the brain. 7. So the atom-like vasanas in the heart are made gross by the lens of the brain, go out through the eyes, mouth and nose and so on, that is through the five senses, and appear in space as wonderful pictures of many kinds. So these are the vasanas which are the biggest hurdle in the sadhanas for self-realization and liberation. So, my dear friends, here ends the complete theory and all description of vasanas, how they affect, how they can be eradicated. So, this is the third video on Vasanas and it is ending here. So please thank you for watching and listening this video and please like, comment and share the video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.